So unfortunately, no HSS tonight. So we decided, let's talk about some college football instead. So that's how we're going to pass the next little while. I'm on the Crime 2 Facebook page. If you have any questions, feel free to send them our way. We'll do our best to answer them. Focusing primarily on the WSU Boise State game tomorrow, obviously a huge one in Pullman. But of course, if you squint closely enough, you can see an Ohio State logo on Evan Closky's polo, a proud Buckeye. They've got a
Sooners, baby.
big
Big
matchup
game.
Against Michelle Boss's Oklahoma Sooners tomorrow. So a little inner newsroom rivalry.
Got a Twitter bet
going on tomorrow. What'd you guys bet?
So if I win, Michelle has to wear a Buckeyes hat, and then I'm going to write down something she has to say, PG rated, of course. And then if she wins, it's going to be the same thing, only she has an Oklahoma V-neck for me to wear, and she will tell me what I need to say, something along the lines of Boomer Sooner, I'm sure. But, Ohio State won big last year in Norman, so we'll see what happens in the horseshoe. I'm excited.
So this is a Michelle Boss size V-neck?
It's
that you would be wearing.
She says that she has one for me. I hope it's not.
I'd rather you be wearing a Michelle Boss size. I mean, if it's truly a bet.
Sadly, I think I'd fit in it because
I don't know.
Such a tiny
I don't know. Amy says hello from Georgia. Amy, I would love to know where in Georgia you are. It's been
We're in
2.5
Georgia.
years in Macon, middle Georgia.
Darnay has some roots there.
I do have some roots. So anyways, back to the topic on hand. WSU, Boise State, we know how it went last year. It's weird going into week 2 for the Cougs and feeling like optimistic and not feeling like they got to figure some things out, because the last 5 years under Mike Leach, and especially last year, or really every year, but the last 2 with Big Sky losses, then going to the Boise State game last year on the heels of the Eastern Washington loss, you weren't really sure what to expect from this team, but saw a lot of good things last weekend.
Yeah, it's really funny because I came into the office the other day and I was like, man, I do not know how to handle this. I feel like Washington State can be on the road to a national championship all of a sudden. No, I'm just kidding. But, first off, Luke Falk, his efficiency just seemed really calm out there. And we talked about this leading up to that Montana State game. 2 years ago, the Portland State one was just a terrible game to play in, pouring rain.
Yeah.
Luke Falk's first start really in that season of hey, this is your team, take the reins. So I think he was a little nervous. Then you go back to Eastern Washington. I don't think enough people really gave that Eastern team much love.
But we also didn't know about Gage Gubert at that point.
That is very true as well. At that point in time, we did not know.
New offensive line.
Yep, new offensive line. We didn't know about Gage Gubert. But, man, did we learn later down the road that Eastern Washington loss was not that bad.
No.
We're going to look back at that team and say, how did Bo Baldwin get this collection, not only of players, but coaches?
Yeah.
Half of them are in the Pac-12 right now. But, look, beyond Luke Falk, the running game. In TV, we love to just build up storylines, and I feel like we've done 4 or 5 stories on the running backs. But they proved that they are such a key element to this Washington State offense, especially James Williams, who, by the way, ever since last year, ever since he was a redshirt, we've always been toting that this guy is going to be the best running back in quite some time there in Pullman, and he could be the NFL-type running back come his senior season. He's just so explosive and really does it all.
If he makes it to a senior season. The way things have gone, he's just a sophomore. Broke the Cougs single-game receiving record for a running back, 13 receptions, over 100 yards. I forget exactly what the number was. Had a couple touchdowns.
I think it was 169 of at least receiving.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. And so you saw a lot of that. You saw that was the focus for Luke Falk. And that's where I think you see the maturity of Luke Falk as a quarterback, just content to take what the defense gives him. Wasn't the most entertaining game to watch from an offensive standpoint. They marched down the field. It was fun to watch from the perspective that he was 20 for 20 in the first half, and people started thinking about that NCAA record of 26 straight completions to start a game. 23, I think, was a Pac-12 mark set by Aaron Rodgers. So that was kind of neat, but when you watch the air raid, you want to see shots downfield. You want to see the big explosives, and we didn't really see that. The longest completion was 24 yards, and that was a run and catch for James Williams. But that's Luke Falk's maturity. Look, if the defense is going to give it to us, if this is moving the chains and generating offense, that's totally fine. It'll be interesting to see now if Boise State will allow them to take more shots. It's really hard to tell going into a game. Mike Leach said there were opportunities to do that a little bit more. I would be curious to see if there's a bit more of an emphasis to challenge the defense downfield than we saw against Montana State when they really didn't need to.
Yeah, and you have to show it. I mean, you have to at some point say we're going to take a shot so that the defense is honest. But if you think back to last year's game with Boise State, the reason why Washington State got in some trouble is I think Falk didn't take the opportunities that they were giving them. They were dropping everybody back, and Luke kind of pushed it. He kind of said, I'm getting, even on that first drive, this is getting boring for me. Mm-hmm. I want to try and test one out. And that wasn't a move. Boise State, if they do the same thing they did last year, it's going to look very similar to the Montana State game, where you just take exactly what they give you. And Luke Falk, at this point in his career, is smart enough to now recognize what defenses are doing, to not feel like he has to do things, throw it down the field, be all everything. He's just got to get into his playmakers' hands. Mm-hmm. And this year, maybe it's a little bit different with the star power as far as wide receiver goes. But when you're talking about dumping it down, there's no better options than Jamal Murrow and James Williams. They are deadly. And honestly, as a defense, dropping 8 is just not an option you can do. You have to keep the running backs honest, not just in the ground game, but what they can do as receivers. So to me, I think it's foolish to drop 8, but also when you don't do that, now we might see Luke Falk take more chances.
Yeah. The thing that concerns me is there were games last year, like the Minnesota game, stretches of the Eastern Washington game, and early, I want to say, in the Boise State game, I think it was a deep ball to Tavares Martin that ended up being a touchdown, where you finally thought, okay, now we're going downfield. They're starting to test out the defense a little bit. Those games, think about the Minnesota game, where they were content to give up the underneath stuff, and they rallied, tackled, and kept the Cougs short of the sticks. Yep. Now, Montana State just doesn't have the athletes to do that. You wonder, as they start to face more potent defenses, if they have the speed to rally and give up some of the short stuff, but then make the tackles and keep them short of the sticks. And that's where you want to see players like Tavares Martin, guys in the slot, guys with speed like Jameer Calvin, the Desmond Patmans, Isaiah Johnson, Max. Can they take the top off the defense, so to speak, and give them more opportunities to go downfield and really test the defense that way and expand the offense? Speaking of offenses, didn't love what you saw from Boise State, especially from our standpoint. We're always paying attention to Brett Rippon. I was following that game, on Twitter, had a pick 6. You saw that he was struggling, and then all of a sudden
fumble as well.
He had the fumble. And a big problem for Boise State is their offensive line. They had to replace 3 starters, gave up 4 sacks. Hercules Mataafa and those guys have to be licking their chops at the opportunity ahead of him. So really curious to see what we see from the offensive standpoint for Boise State, who really put up pedestrian numbers, 357 total yards. I mean, Boise is an offense. I think they averaged about 475 a year ago, not close to the standard that we're used to, and then enters Montel Cozart and really makes things interesting from the quarterback perspective for Brian Harsin.
Yeah, I was going to say, and Troy, by the way, is a very good team out of the Sun Belt. They will be 1, 2, maybe 3 in that conference. So that was a tough game. But as you mentioned, they bring in the transfer from Kansas. They were always going to add him into the game plan somehow. Now, because Rippon did not perform well, that amplified his performance. But he came in, I think he threw the ball 9 times, ran the ball 8 times. So you're getting more of that. What is he going to do?
Dual threat.
And that has been an issue for Alex Grinch in the past. So we'll see what he brings to the table. He might be a better option against Washington State than a Brett Rippon. But from that standpoint, as you mentioned, Hercules Mataafa, Daniel Ekuale, and Ekuale, by the way, is getting like a big pimp up after that big game against Montana State. Those two will have to be big in pressuring the quarterback one way or the other. So we might see the secondary tested a little bit more against Boise State, especially with Rippon. Shalom Luani, that was a game he returned last year. He had a big game, intercepting a couple of passes, I think, from Rip. And then also Charleston White, I think, had that interception.
So 3 interceptions for Rippon in that game.
So Washington State was able to make some things happen on the defensive end. Last year just really came down to like a slip and slide factor in the beginning, just not starting off strong, because when it came to that third quarter, they really came back. But as you mentioned, defensively, we'll finally get a feel for this team, because it just looked Montana State was just so timid.
Yeah, and Harsin really downplayed the notion that there is a quarterback controversy in Boise. Brett Rippon will be the guy. He'll be the guy, unless they really come out and throw everybody for a loop. He'll be the guy that gets the first snaps, and in all likelihood, the majority of the snaps. But there's always the possibility if the defensive line gets after him. He has been turnover prone, as you mentioned, that WSU game. Maybe you see more Montel Cozart if Rippon's struggles continue. Boise State, I think, is just really curious to see if they can get the offense off the ground. Jeremy McNichols not around anymore. They got some new running backs that they're having to feature, and then just the struggles with the offensive line, and then how that filtered down to the offense as a whole. They'd love to get going. But WSU, again, now talking about them on the defensive side of the ball, a lot to be excited about what you saw on Saturday.
Yeah, and not to mention that WSU was actually a really good team at stopping the run last year. So that's going to transfer over again this year. That is something that Alex Grinch makes a point of teaching, especially leading up into the season, that they are going to be a run-stopping team first. And that's what you kind of need to do in the Pac-12. We always think about gunslingers, but you think about the Stanfords, you think about the USCs. I know they got Darnold, but they start with all the ground play. So I don't think Boise State's going to get much going there. It's going to come down to Rippon really making plays against Wazoo, and the offense for Washington State just taking enough advantages to give the defense a little bit of slack.
Yeah.
It's just very weird. Again, I'm feeling oddly confident for the Cougs entering this game, and I know in my preseason prediction I picked that Boise State would win, and I feel like I should still stick with that. But at the same point, with how Boise State looked week one and how Washington State looked week one, it's tough to take that out of my brain.
We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Just a couple takeaways from WSU on the defensive side of the ball. You mentioned Daniel Ikuale. They need somebody else to be disruptive alongside Hercules Mataafa because he demands so much attention.
Yes.
So that takes some of the pressure off Mataafa, who had a really good game. I want to say 2.5 tackles for loss, sack and a half in that one. Jalen Thompson coming into his own, first career interception, I want to say. The other thing is, and I noticed this very early on in the game, the defense looks fast.
Yes.
And they're called the Speed D. That's what Alex Grinch wants.
Yeah.
That's what you have to have in the Pac-12. They're not necessarily building a defense with a ton of bulk and a ton of size.
Yeah.
But one that can fly around, and they looked fast against Montana State, and that's certainly encouraging and will be necessary as they get into the conference schedule. So something to keep an eye on as they get challenged by what you expect to be a far more potent offense in Boise State going forward. All right, now let's go down this road, because I was thinking about it today. They blow out Montana State.
Yep.
Say they beat Boise State.
Yep.
Nevada seemed like they had a solid opener, but you expect them to win that game. Oregon State looked miserable, almost lost to Portland State. So 4-0 heading into USC. USC didn't look great in week one. Sam Darnold did not look like a Heisman Trophy candidate and a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. Now, that's not necessarily what you're going to see from this USC program going forward, but if we're just going to overreact a little bit after week one, you're looking at a potential 4-0 in the end of September if they can take a home game against USC, 5-0 at the end of the month. I mean, who knows? They were one win away from the Pac-12 last year, and in all likelihood, it's going to come down to that game in Seattle at the end of the season to determine who wins the Pac-12 North. But you can't help but get excited about it. And the thing that you love is they didn't have that step back to start the season. Not from a mental or psychological standpoint, but simply at the polls.
Yeah.
Because they weren't ranked to start, but they were ranked to start this year. You're not getting dropped down from the rankings and having to do so much work to get back in the picture.
Yes.
It has bowl ramifications, so many different things. So simply that start is encouraging from a number of different standpoints, but looking at the polls and then thinking, maybe you're being a little optimistic down the road how this could play out if what we saw last Saturday is indicative of who this team really is.
Yeah, and you're just watching a maturation process with this program since day one. I mean, look, Mike Leach took over the program. Wazoo wasn't very good, all right? So then they had that 6-6 season. They made it to a bowl game. Maybe they lucked into that. Maybe they were in over their heads a little bit, and they had that awful bowl game experience. Next year they take a step back, and then slowly but surely, they've all had these little experiences which have helped build up to this moment. The opening day losses, being overconfident, all these things that you just have to experience and realize that if you do A, you're going to lose. Mike Leach is like, when it comes to football, he is a boring guy. When it comes to anything else, you want to sit down and talk with him for hours. But he stresses the same thing over and over again. And same with Luke Falk now. Next play, next game, yada, 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 all the same stuff. And I think that's what we're finally seeing from the team. Last year in the bowl game against Minnesota, I felt like they entered that pretty lackadaisical. I don't know if they really cared much about it. But there's a focus with this team. You know that the seniors have been through so much in this program and have watched it grow up. And it's just very impressive to see what they can do. Now, USC plays Stanford, which is a must-see game for all of us out here. That is a monster Pac-12 game to see what we're looking at as far as what the Cougs are going to face in USC at the end of the month and what the Cougs are going to face in Stanford when they come to Pullman, I think in November, closer around where that Seattle game is. But that game could actually be up for the Pac-12 North before the Husky game, because it's always going to be those three, it seems like, we're not factoring in Oregon this season. But that's the important thing, is getting to that 4-0 and then getting to that moment where the spotlight is on you. Friday Night Lights in Pullman. Both teams may be undefeated. No matter what, even if USC loses to Stanford, that is still going to be such a monumental game in Pullman. And it's going to be, quite possibly, if things work out the way it's supposed to, the biggest game in Pullman since, I can't even, 2003? Back to the Gesser days? Brink, maybe? I'm trying to think.
Yeah. The Apple Cup last year was big, but potentially when you're talking about the rankings, that sort of thing, this could be on a higher level, or at the very least on par with that. You look back
to the Apple Cup game, and you forget the hype to it because it just got so sour.
Well, and part of it is where UW was at that point, playing for a spot in the college football playoff.
Yeah.
So it's
you're right.
It's interesting to go down that road and see what this thing could all lead to, but. That's for them to figure out in the coming Saturdays. What you like to see is, you talk about the maturation process, the maturity of the team, just how they came out and handled business. Because you've seen there be instances where they take a game very seriously, and they don't go into that, but whether it's a season opener, whether it's an Apple Cup or a bowl game, and they come out kind of flat, or maybe they come out tight, and then they start pressing and that sort of thing. This game, they felt very much more relaxed.
Yeah.
And at home. And so I think you see that leadership that a lot of guys talked about Saturday after the game, and we got a chance to talk to them on Tuesday. Just the leadership with this program, how seriously they take these games, and they've been in these battles and maybe aren't so phased when they get to those situations. And so love what you saw from them to start the season, but a much tougher test you'd expect against Boise State coming up tomorrow. A couple others just to touch on real quick. Any final thoughts on WSU Boise State?
No, I just think that this is a game that Wazoo has to win. I think they're the better team. They're the better team on paper. And Washington State's home. They have 5 home games in a row. You got to be 4-0 entering USC. So I'm cautiously optimistic for Washington State fans out there. But again, that Boise State, they pencil this one in because they don't get many big non-conference games as well. And this is a biggie against the Pac-12 team.
And by many metrics, WSU should have won that game last year. At Boise State, they lose by a field goal.
Yep.
Anyway, the Vandals lose to UNLV, who lost.
Look, I'm telling
the biggest loss in college football history based on the spread. 45-point favorite. You lose by a field goal to an FCS team in Hampton.
First off, Petrino is doing such a good job there in Moscow, and he probably will leave at the end of the season. I thought he might leave at the end of last season. Is there a chance? Of course, there's definitely a chance. But with the way that they played in that home opener, it really had me sort of in the same way of Washington State a little bit. Idaho's a different program with Petrino. And these guys are different, where they struggled in that first quarter against Sacramento State. It was ugly. And they picked themselves up. All it took was one play, and bam. Now, I don't know if UNLV was looking ahead to Idaho. I know that seems silly, but the fact of the matter is that you were a 45-point favorite. You lost to Idaho last year at home. Maybe you were diverting some attention to a harder game. Idaho's only a 6-point favorite. So it might be a closer game than you think.
Yeah.
I think Idaho's going to win, but don't be surprised if it's closer than you think.
Yeah, and I'll give you the floor for this one. The Evan Closky Bowl between North Dakota State and Eastern Washington, of course, formerly of Fargo, covered the Bison for some years out there. Man, that's a tough task coming off the Texas Tech game, and I was just looking at the numbers that North Dakota State put up against, an overmatched Mississippi Valley State team, but that's just a program that flexes on teams. They do what they do. They're tough, they're nasty, and they don't give you a whole lot.
Yeah, when you think about the Missouri Valley Conference as a whole versus the Big Sky, the Missouri Valley usually wins in those battles. Last year, it took one of the best teams to ever come through Eastern Washington, and sadly a team that didn't even make it to a national championship game, but it took one of their best teams with one of their best coaching staffs to go to overtime with North Dakota State on the road in their building. This year, it's a totally different dynamic with Eastern Washington. I left that game with Texas Tech more concerned, and then, I get it. They lost to Texas Tech. I'm not saying they should have won that game, but Eastern Washington has rarely
usually put up a fight.
Exactly. When was the last time that Eastern Washington hasn't given fits to an FBS team, especially a team like Texas Tech, who has a terrible defense?
Yeah.
They scored 10 points on that team. That team can't guard anybody. They haven't, I looked up the stats. 2013 was the last time Texas Tech held an opponent to 10 points or less. That's a problem, especially when you're Eastern Washington and you're not going to stop teams like you usually do. And that's where the veterans are on defense. So I'm not very confident for Eastern Washington. I do think North Dakota State wins. I'm wondering how North Dakota State handles smoke and the environment.
Yeah.
We're kind of accustomed to it because it's been happening, but with North Dakota State coming in, they're going to smell that smoke. It's going to be a weird game for them. They have some injuries. So I don't think it's going to be a bloodbath, but I just see North Dakota State pounding you down. They got a great bulldozing mentality, similar to the Big Ten. They're gonna kind of run you into the ground, and I think that's gonna wear on this team.
TJ Jones, real quick. Back to Boise State WSU. I saw the game in Boise last year. Tomorrow's game will be much the same. LOL, Boise killed them. I was there. So doesn't agree with our assessment that maybe WSU could have won that game.
It was, if you watch the first half, yes. If you watch the second half, no.
Yeah.
So, but that's football. You can be so pathetic in one half and play great in another, but if you can't overcome what you started the game as.
I don't think TJ was feeling too comfortable when Rippon was throwing his third interception of the game, and WSU had a chance late. They had, of course, they don't get that field goal blocked. We're looking at a tie football game. But back to Eastern Washington, North Dakota State. The thing that worries me is, Mississippi Valley State, again, this is Mississippi Valley State. 3 first downs, negative 31 rushing yards. And Aaron Best has shown it was 50-50 run against pass against Texas Tech, more of an emphasis on the ground game, and it helps to kind of keep defenses honest against your passing attack. But man, if North Dakota State tightens the screws on the Eags like they've shown the ability to do, not just against Mississippi Valley State, but against, the Towsons of the world in the national championship game a few years back against a very good running back in Terrence West that Eastern fans know about, that's just what they do. And so if they keep Eastern Washington's running game down against a new look group of wide receivers, Splendorio had the fumble very early on. They had a series, I think it was the next one, with a few drops, and that was during the stretch where they could have gained some momentum down there in Lubbock and just were unable to cash in on those opportunities. That's what worries me about what they do defensively. You expect teams to score some points against Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington's won shootouts. We've grown accustomed to that sort of thing, but that Bison defense is so tough against an Eastern Washington offense that is still finding its identity, that has a lot of guys that need to prove themselves as playmakers outside of Gage Gubrud. That worries me.
I just think that and again, I hate to use the Texas Tech game, but the reason that I'm using it is because entering the season I had these concerns, and they only amplified by what I saw. This just very well could be a season like 2 years ago when Jordan West was playing a lot, where they're going to build a little bit. They lost so much. When you're an FCS program and you lose 3 receivers that total, Shaq Hill had 17 touchdowns, Cooper Kupp had 17.
Here's the problem with that is we were having the same conversation 4 years ago when they lost Greg Hurd.
That's right.
They lost Brandon Kaufman, Nick Edwards, And everybody wondered if they would be able to replace these guys. Little did we know there were 2 pros, almost 3, coming up in the ranks. And so I think Eastern fans have just grown accustomed to not rebuild, reload. And so maybe they do that down the line. Maybe you end up being right, and this is where they do kind of take a step back, and it takes a year or 2 to rebuild that receiver crop. But it's just hard to tell after what we saw in the Texas Tech game.
And maybe Aaron Best is focusing a little bit more on North Dakota State entering that Texas Tech game. Maybe that's a bigger impact game for him than the Texas Tech game was. So, Bo loved to show up in those FBS games and show the big programs what Eastern Washington had. Maybe Eastern Washington surprises me and looks completely different on Saturday and just shows up, and they are just more prepared against the Bison than Texas Tech. But they should have been a little bit familiar with that air raid since they played Washington State last year. So
I also think in football games, the dominoes start falling and things get carried away. You could play that Texas Tech game 10 times, and I don't think you see, 56-10, more than once. It's just how it goes any given Saturday. And so if they come out, compete, figure out a way to beat a team like the Bison, obviously enormous for Aaron Best in the program and the confidence of the team, and we'll learn a lot of good things about the program going forward if that's the case. So, and our buddy TJ says Eastern Washington will kill them. So, in this part of the country, we would like to see that.
Yeah, I do have to say quickly, just I don't want to see the even split between passing and running. That's not Eastern Washington's bread and butter.
Yeah.
If you're running it 36 times a game, probably not moving the ball as much.
And maybe that starts to become the MO under Aaron Best, but you also need the personnel. You also need the personnel for that. Yeah. And right now, coming off of the Bo Baldwin era, you figure the personnel lends itself to the passing attack. So curious to see how that evolves through the years. Yep. That'll be a great one. I assume that one will be sold out. I haven't heard.
Yes. Hopefully everyone comes out, even though with the smoke and issues, but that is sold out. Yeah.
If you want to avoid the smoke, go to the Kibbe Dome. Hopefully see a 2-0 Idaho team. Hopefully everything will be clear by tomorrow night.
You can do the doubleheader.
You can do the doubleheader. Our Brett Alberry is going to be doing the doubleheader. Yeah. That should be a fun one. Under the lights out there in Pullman should be a great game. And 11 a.m. Whitworth and Whittier. Check out the brand new turf out there at the Pine Bowl.
That's right. They replaced the grass. Unfortunately, I love a good grass field. But
it looks sharp. I drove by there though. It looks really, really nice.
And not to mention, Whitworth. They put a pounding on
Central.
Last week.
That team that beat them in OT last year.
I was going to say, Ian Closky. We are actually very lucky in this area to have the quarterbacks that we do.
Well, I've wondered this, and it's worth digging into at some point. This is the best quarterback group we've had since when? And especially when you factor in Whitworth. Even if you just look at Idaho, Eastern, and WSU, you got to be going back a while.
Oh, yeah.
But when you factor in Whitworth as well, is there a better time for quarterbacks in our area? It's hard to imagine.
It's remarkable. You're seeing All-American, Luke Falk, a potential first-round pick.
Yeah.
Matt Linehan, who's going to be the most decorated passer in Idaho history.
Yeah.
Colsey's going to be that for Whitworth.
Yeah.
Gubrud had 5,700 yards or something last year. Probably should have won the Walter Payton Award. So, it's remarkable. It would be hard because you would have to go back to at least Holiday a little bit for the numbers, Brink, Gesser, Bledsoe. You could start with one team and then filter down from there.
Yeah, but
it's hard. It's hard for me to imagine that at 4 different schools you have the talent.
It's certainly since I've been here in the 5+ years. Nowhere close than where it is right now.
The next year, it's going to all turn over.
A lot of fun stuff to watch. Hey, best of luck to all the high school teams that are having to play on Saturday and Monday. Hope it all works out for you. Hope everything gets cleared up. Go watch some college football. Great weekend in our area with everybody at home.
And Seahawks, of course, are Sunday.
Yeah. So enjoy the weekend. Watch lots of football. Enjoy it, everybody.